Nolte Chapter 23, Hypothalamus and the Limbic System. Outline and objectives for today's lesson plan include the limbic system overview and its clinical relevance for chiropractors. We want to look and see what do our industry standard textbooks say about the limbic system. The information differs from book to book, so we also really need to pay attention to what the literature on PubMed is saying about the limbic system. We also want to clue in on what we need to know in order to pass our boards. And the idea of clinical relevance and the limbic system is extremely important. The limbic system is emotions and memory and plays a big role in patient care. So how do we help our patients with this information? First and foremost, the limbic system is this complex network for creating emotions and memories from these emotions. One thing we want to remember is that emotions are not necessarily logical, but they're designed to be quick and to keep us safe. It's a quick survey of the scene. Do we feel good? Do we feel bad? And what are we going to do about it is the idea behind the limbic system. And then the quick recall of, was this situation safe? Do I want to go into this situation again? So looking at the limbic system, we want to remember this basic format. So we'll see a stimulus, an emotion from this stimulus. We're going to filter it, right? So some of us are going to have stronger filters than others. The idea of kind of slowing down and filtering and interpreting before we create behavior from it. Right? So think about this when you think about like the startle response or something like that. So we don't really get a good filter and interpretation right away. That comes a little bit later before that kind of reflex of jumping back. Little history for you here. It's named by Broca. So we might recall Broca from Broca's area, or production of speech coming from Broca's area. And the limbic system was named by Broca in 1878. It always amazes me when things that we still use today were discovered about the brain in these earlier times when we didn't have things like MRIs or all of the equipment we have today. So Broca. Okay, so Paul Pierre Broca named the area the limbic lobe. In 1937, Papez is connected the anatomy of the limbic system to emotions. Okay, so we'll look at the Papez circuit as well. It's another big name in neuro. In 1952, Paul MacLean coined the term limbic system itself here to describe Broca's limbic lobe. So that's where you're going to see these kind of differences: limbic lobe, singular gyrus of the limbic lobe, and then we have the limbic system. Okay, so describing Broca's limbic lobe and related to the anatomy to emotions. So what does Manter and Gatz say? Manter and Gatz is a main neurology book. So when the literature differs, one of the things that we do is we look at Manter and Gatz and we say, okay, what does Manter and Gatz have to say about this? That's going to be the kind of stopping point here. And what does Manter and Gatz say? The limbic system can be defined best by its functions. The anatomic circuits required to carry out these functions extend from the cortex to the brain system, but no single anatomical definition of this extensive system has been universally accepted. That's a problem because we want to know what it is, and our textbooks are telling us one thing, and another book will be telling us something else, and Manter and Gatz is even saying it's not universally accepted. So what does the literature say? If you note, this is from the Indian Journal of Psychiatry, and they say there is no universal agreement on the total list of structures that comprise the limbic system either. So I kind of picked one from a different part of the world to kind of see what's going on. Worldwide, no one wants to agree on the limbic system. They claim the limbic system to be these areas here: limbic cortex, cingulate gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus, hippocampal formation, the dentate gyrus, hippocampus, amygdala, septal areas, and hypothalamus. And again, another paper here saying the same thing. Okay, so limbic systems are for emotion and memory, but no real simple single limbic system can be defined. Okay, so this one also kind of adds in a little bit here, so we'll read what this paper has to say. The concept of a single limbic system is shown to be outmoded. Instead, anatomical, neurophysiological, functional neuroimaging, and neuropsychological evidence is described that anterior limbic and related structures, including the orbital frontal cortex and amygdala, are involved in emotion, reward valuation, and reward-related decision-making, but not memory, with the value representations transmitted to the anterior cingulate cortex for action outcome learning in this emotion limbic system. A computational principle is that feed-forward pattern association networks learn associations from visual, olfactory, auditory stimuli to primary reinforcers such as taste, touch, and pain. So what we're seeing, what we're smelling, what we're hearing, okay, taste, touch, pain, and we create this emotion to it. So emotions are complicated. We knew that before we ever walked into school. We knew emotions are complicated and not necessarily rational, but one of the things we want to realize here is that they keep us safe. They're designed to keep us safe and keep us alive and give us that quick reaction. So the main theme in reviewing the literature was that basically we're looking at structures that process, or we look at the functions and we say who's processing emotion, risk-reward calculations for decision making, that visual, olfactory, auditory stimulus, taste, touch, and pain. And that's what we're going to call the limbic system. So let's break it down a little more here. So what does limbic mean? It means border, okay? Structures lie along a horseshoe-shaped area of cortex that appears to be a border between the cerebral cortex and the subcortical structures of the diencephalon. So remember, your diencephalon is all things thalamus, right? So tel, di, mes, met, mi, and that diencephalon is going to be thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus. Okay, so that area there. Limbic system, again, key point is survival. Okay, so control of functions necessary for self-preservation and species preservation. It regulates autonomics. So we looked at autonomics in chapter 10, really. So that's our fight or flight, rest and digest. And endocrine function, particularly in response to emotional stimuli. So you get scared, your heart rate jumps up, your blood pressure jumps up. Okay, so why would that happen, right? Why would that happen from an emotion? It's the limbic system driving that. Provides emotional impact that makes a scene important to us and helps establish memories. So it makes something stick out, and maybe we don't actually remember everything about it, but we remember how we feel. And did we like it or did we not? Do we move towards it again or do we back off? It sets the level of arousal and is involved in motivation and reinforcing behaviors. It's critical to particular types of memory and closely connected to the olfactory system, since this system is critical to survival. So think about the girl here with the strawberries. This is an enjoyable experience. She has smelled this before and she knows that they're going to be sweet and leave her feeling good. So she wants to eat these. And so she's having an emotional experience with it. She's happy to eat these. And then this smell of a house burning down would create fear and set off an autonomic fight or flight response as well, and that quick memory associated with it. So let's break it down on the structures again, right? So let's look at these structures. All of these have been cited as, or most of these have been cited as parts of the limbic system in some of the previous slides, but this gets a little complicated here, right? We need to kind of boil it down a little bit more. So let's boil it down to this one here. So we can see our hippocampus here at the bottom, okay, bottom right. And then if you come along the left side, you can see the amygdala. You can see that olfactory bulb and where the sense of smell would come in, right? And then we can see just the frontal lobe for where are we in space here, right? We have temporal lobe here, occipital's back here. And then we could see our hypothalamic area or hypothalamus area here, and then this being the thalamus or that switching station. Even easier, let's break it down to this, right? So what are the boards going to ask us? What do we have to remember is the basics here of the limbic system? It's hippocampus, amygdala, hypothalamus, and the thalamus. How are we going to remember that? Yes, it's the hippo in a hat. What? Hippo in a hat? Yeah, it's the limbic system. Hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and thalamus. There is our test question from the boards. It's the hippo in a hat. No, they're not going to ask you what the hippo in the hat is, but hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, thalamus, that's the basis of the limbic system that everyone can agree on, all the papers, all the books. So what's the hippocampus? Okay, so note that Google map picture up in the right-hand corner there to tell us that this is going to help us with an understanding of spatial relations within our environment. So how do we get to where we're going? How do we remember where we're going, right? How did we do that before Google Maps? It's involved in many declarative memory functions. We've got long-term physiological changes here at the hippocampus associated with memory. It helps control corticosteroid production. So corticosteroid production, remember, is going to be part of that long-term stress response. So corticosteroids are going to be subcategorized in glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and gonadotropins. So gluco, blood sugar regulation, mineral blood pressure, and gonadotropins are going to be for reproductive regulations. So it's encoding memories and retrieval of them, and activation of the hippocampus can be seen in learning about new surroundings and retrieving directions. So it's that map in your brain. It's how do you know where you're going, right? And we might not totally remember, but if we just drive and we're like, oh yeah, we turn right here. I can't tell you the name of the street, but I know where it is. That kind of thing. That's our hippocampus guiding that. Hypothalamus, this is where neuro becomes endocrine. This is where the nervous system becomes in charge of the hormones of the body. So it's a primary output node for the limbic system. It's going to be below the thalamus, hypo is below, forms the cap over the brainstem, and forms the inferior lateral walls of the third ventricle, so the bottom and sides of that third ventricle. Contains many important nuclei like the mammillary bodies, which are those paired anterior nuclei, so in the front, that act as those olfactory relay stations. So it has to do with memory and smell. Smell and will really encode a lot of memories, right? So still to this day, my grandfather has been dead since 1994, but if I smell someone that wears that old aftershave he used to smell like, I will remember him. I'll walk past somebody, smell that, and remember my grandpa. So those things are deeply encoded in us, right? And then I'll be happy about that as well. So that quick little olfactory relay of that memory and that emotion. Infundibulum just means stalk. Okay, so this is the stalk that's going to connect to the pituitary gland. And when we get into endocrine, we'll talk more about pituitary, but we have an anterior and a posterior pituitary, and this is going to be where a lot of hormonal control happens. So hypothalamus is also going to receive input from the hippocampus. So again, main thing here, hypothalamus, where neuro becomes endocrine. And we see this initiating the physical responses to emotions. So think autonomics again. And so that quick fight or flight from being afraid. Okay, so it also can perceive pleasure, okay, fear, rage, biological rhythms and drives. So food drive, water, hydration drive, and sex drive to perpetuate the species. Here's a picture of our hypothalamus. So these are the nuclei. So if you notice, they kind of look like the same artist, right? It does look like the exact same artist from our thalamus, and we had those little jelly bean looking pictures for the thalamus. But this is the hypothalamus and their specific nuclei. And here we can see that infundibulum, that stalk, and here's the pituitary gland. Okay, so we see anterior pituitary here, see a little dividing line there, and then posterior over here. Some books will even divide it out into a middle pituitary as well. So we'll look at these specific nuclei in a little bit. Another thing I want to point out is this area right here is a little slice through the optic chiasm. Okay, so optic chiasm. And if you like to study with pictures, you can test yourself on which nuclei are which ones here. So let's look at our boundaries here for the anatomy, the structure of it. So superior is the hypothalamic sulcus. Anterior would be the anterior commissure. So remember, commissure is where something's crossing over. And the optic chiasm, again, the crossover. Inferior would be the tubercinarium. And then the infundibulum. Posterior would be mammillary bodies. We also see zones to the hypothalamus. So if you look to the bottom center there, I'll grab my red pen so you can kind of see where I'm at. This right here, we have the periventricular zone. So remember, that's just in regards to the ventricles. So peri just around. And then we see the medial zone, and then the lateral zone, obviously lateral to that. We like it when they're easy and tell us where they are, right? So our preoptic area here, we could see the periventricular area, medial preoptic, lateral preoptic. We see sexual behavior here, parental behavior, thermal regulation, sleep-wake cycles. Okay, so preoptic. I have a little green box around the preoptic. Anterior hypothalamic area. And so we're going to see aggressive behavior here, sexual behavior here, and thermal regulation here. And I have a little green box around it here on the left as well. Anterior hypothalamic area here, you could see the suprachiasmatic nucleus is the one that's circled here. So this here is going to give us our biological rhythms. So circadian rhythms, we kind of understand that the circadian rhythm of the day and night and then kind of the week kind of thing, right? But circannual is kind of interesting. So what happens, yearly, right? So where do you go every year? What's your normal cycle? How do animals come back at the same spot, the same time every year in order to mate? That kind of thing. Receives input here from some of the specialized eye cells or retinal cells. So that's how we kind of figure out, is it day, is it night? Are we supposed to sleep? Are we supposed to be up and happy and awake and alert, or sleepy? It also, here, it activates the T1 and T2 sympathetic preganglionic neurons, inhibiting superior cervical ganglion. So this is going to inhibit melatonin release from the pineal gland. And this to me is interesting when we work in that area, right? So the cervical area and the thoracic area, and what effect are we going to have on the body? So the supraoptic nucleus here in this anterior hypothalamic area, we can also see our magnocellular neurosecretory cells. So what does that mean, right? So these are going to terminate in the posterior pituitary. So this is going to be connected to when you study endocrine, and we talk about posterior pituitary secreting oxytocin, which is the love hormone. So this is for especially things like childbirth and breastfeeding. So what makes the mom love the child as opposed to see this as a traumatic event, right? So oxytocin is that love hormone, right? ADH, vasopressin. So ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone, and a diuretic makes you urinate. So an antidiuretic would make you not urinate. And what this is, so vasopressin here is for blood pressure. Okay, so ADH and vasopressin, same thing. Just showing you the words here. So pressure, you could see pressin, vaso being blood vessel. So this is going to regulate water, which will regulate blood pressure. So oxytocin and ADH. We don't usually call it vasopressin anymore. Okay? ADH, also known as vasopressin. Also in this anterior hypothalamic area, we see the paraventricular nucleus, and that's got the green rectangle over it as well. So this is regulating anterior pituitary. So anterior pituitary is going to be a lot of the different stimulating hormones, thyroid stimulating hormone, melanocyte stimulating hormone. We'll see that later on. You can also see the magnocellular cells here that we looked at. Parvocellular neurosecretory cells connect to the limbic system and the sympathetic preganglionic neurons. So this is where we're getting this autonomic control. Again, oxytocin, ADH, vasopressin, all going to be involved here as well. Tuberal hypothalamic area, ventral medial nucleus. So here is appetite, body weight, insulin regulation, and possibly sexual behavior. So food issues, right? Appetite, body weight, insulin, and then sexual behavior. Tuberal area here, the arcuate nucleus regulates anterior pituitary gland, feeding, regulating feeding here. Tuberal hypothalamic area, dorsal medial nucleus, this is going to be associated with rage. So this lateral tuberal nuclei, appetite and body weight control. Mammillary area associated with these posterior hypothalamic nuclei for thermoregulation, emotion, and short-term memory. Okay, so we can see the stria terminalis, and that's in green. So this is color-coded as to how to look at this slide. You see stria terminalis in green, ventral amygdaloid pathway in yellow, and the fornix is in red. So let's look at that stria terminalis. So the white matter connecting the amygdala to the anterior and ventral medial hypothalamic nuclei. Okay, so white matter connecting amygdala to hypothalamus. Ventral amygdaloid pathway, so more direct white matter connection between amygdala and hypothalamus, so just more direct. You can see where it's that straight line through as opposed to up and around. And you can see in red there the fornix, and that's the white matter connection, hippocampus with mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus. So remember that mammillary, that's going to be kind of that scent and emotion and memory associated with it. So more on our hypothalamic function here. So receives input from the cortex, including limbic system, brainstem, spinal cord, regulates endocrine, regulates autonomics, regulates behavior. A little bit of this endocrine control here, so that anterior pituitary and the different things that it is stimulating. A little bit bigger of a picture here for you. So you can see number one, when appropriately stimulating, hypothalamic neurons secrete releasing and inhibiting hormones into the primary capillary plexus. 2. Hypothalamic hormones travel through the portal veins to the anterior pituitary where they stimulate or inhibit release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. 3. Anterior pituitary hormones are secreted into the secondary capillary plexus. I like this picture a whole lot more than the previous pictures when I was memorizing my hormones of the pituitary. I found it to be just a whole lot easier. So if this works for you, great. If the other ones work better for you, great. So anterior pituitary, ACTH going to the adrenal cortex, growth hormone going to everything, right? But specifically muscle and bone here. MSH or melanocyte stimulating hormone, this one's just showing it going to the skin because it's super basic, but yes, it does obviously contribute to skin color, but it has a process in the brain. So think of substantia nigra, what's making that black substance black, right? That's melanin. So in the production of dopamine, that melanin, that black substance, that smudge is left there. And we know in Parkinson's disease that that area is pale as the salient feature of Parkinson's disease for a diagnosis. TSH to the thyroid, so thyroid stimulating hormone. And then we see our gonadotropins, FSH and LH, so follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And these go to the reproductive organs. We also see prolactin. So when you see prolactin, okay, and then lact, milk. Okay? And then posterior pituitary is oxytocin and ADH. Now this might seem overwhelming at first, but the way that I did this, which made it easier for me, was I memorized posterior pituitary first. It's only got two things, post-pit, ADH and oxytocin. Done. Anything else? Anterior pituitary. And then you can kind of fill in if you have a little bit more space in your memory banks in your brain there for the rest of the hormones for anterior pituitary. Simply put here, an example would be the hypothalamus would release something called thyrotropin releasing hormone. That's going to talk to the anterior pituitary, which is going to release thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's going to get the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone, and that's going to go to the target cells. So the idea here, when you see, the way that I remembered this first, when I had to just kind of first start to piece it apart before I understood it, I just needed to kind of come up with some rules, right? So if I see an R, like TRH, R, any of these releasing hormones, and you're going to see it in other hormones as well when you get into endocrine, which is not this chapter. But when you see that R, you know it's hypothalamus is giving off that hormone. Okay, so it's sending that hormone to the pituitary. If you see the S, like TSH, that's pituitary to the target organ, so the thyroid. Okay, so R would be hypothalamus, and the S would be the pituitary to the organ. So TRH or TSH specifically here. And this is a negative feedback loop is what this slide is telling us. So stimulates and inhibits. So hypothalamus stimulates anterior pit, ant pit stimulates thyroid, thyroid gives off its thyroid hormones, goes to the target cells. When we have enough, we call it a negative feedback loop. When we have enough, it turns off the signal to send more hormone. So think about the thermostat in your house. When you have it set at 70 degrees and it gets too hot, the air conditioning is going to kick on. And then once it reaches the point that you've set it at, our set point, that negative feedback, it's going to shut it off until it needs more. And then it's going to turn it back on, back and forth. So that's that negative feedback loop. Sexual behavior, so that medial preoptic area in the anterior hypothalamic nuclei, projectocytes in the midbrain, reticular formation, sympathetic and parasympathetic preganglionic neurons, body temperature control, that's the preoptic region in the anterior hypothalamic nuclei. So receptors here regulate temperature of the body, supplying this hypothalamus. So this is going to be regular body temperature. Our set point is really also going to be dictated by the thyroid. So if we have a patient that comes in at like 95 degrees all the time, when you're taking their vitals, we think thyroid first, right? So that's going to be our first thought process. So don't think hypothalamus first, okay? So think thyroid first. But hypothalamus, I get the H's there confused for a second, hypothalamus, hippocampus. So hypothalamus, where neuro becomes endocrine, is really going to be in charge of, are we cranking up the heat for a fever too? Okay. So this is going to receive body surface temperature information. Damage here produces chronic hyperthermia or excessive heat, and they're going to stop sweating, peripheral vasodilation, they need to move to shade. Maybe this is damaged in some of our MS patients that are totally heat intolerant and don't sweat appropriately. So hypothalamus in review. What do we need to know here to pass the test? Am I going to ask you the specific nuclei? No. Okay. The basics though, yeah, regulating body temperature, sweating, shivering, regulates hunger and satiety in response to nutrient levels in the blood. Okay, or hormones. So if we're hungry all the time, get some good nutrition in there, and hopefully that'll tell the hypothalamus that we're full and that we're satiated. It also regulates water balance and thirst. So if our patient wants to lose weight, and a lot of patients are come in saying, hey doc, help me lose weight, I don't know how to lose weight. And first thing you do is don't take anything away from them, because nobody wants that first. So that's an emotional component here in the limbic system. What we want to do is we want to add in water. That's an easy fix. So if we regulate water balance and thirst, a lot of times that'll regulate hunger and satiety levels in the body, because it's the same system here. Okay, so we want to add in water. How much water? Your body weight divided by 2. That's the basic equation for water. So body weight divided by 2, and that's how many ounces you need a day. So a 200-pound person, 100 ounces of water in a day. And then you add things in, like, were you sweating a lot? Is it very hot? Did you have a lot of caffeine, a lot of sugar, a lot of salt, things like that? But that's your base. So hypothalamus strongly influences autonomics, endocrine function, behavior. There are localized areas in the hypothalamus that will activate the sympathetic nervous system, and some that will increase parasympathetic activity. So remember that sympathetic activates arousal responses with the fight or flight. Parasympathetic reverses our sympathetics and returns us to a non-alarmed state, or what we call rest and digest. There's our friends there that we saw in chapter 10, our fight or flight buddy and our freeze and appease of the bunny rabbit. So it's not always useful to fight or flight, but we might need to freeze and appease in order to survive. We always want to bring it back to what we do for a living here, right? So that fight or flight, that emotional component, and the subluxation patterns that we're left with. So the lower body, right, so the ilium, is going to tilt one way or the other, PI or AS. So posterior inferior or anterior and superior. And then the sacrum is going to subluxate one way or the other. And then the lumbar spine is going to compensate, thoracic spine, cervical spine, and then the little pulley system at the suboccipital region in order to keep the eyes level with the horizon. So this emotional response to protect the body and throwing us off balance. And then we're left with these patterns, these compensation patterns. So we want to honor that and understand that before we just go in and try and move structure without understanding the function that created it in the first place. So we need to de-stress the body first and then tell it it's safe and create that nice safe space in our office for them to relax. And then we can adjust them and then do a nice little neurological reset to kind of set and hold that new peaceful pattern. So that parasympathetic is what we're going to try and drive that stressed out patient from that sympathetic state into a nice parasympathetic state. And then hopefully they're able to go home, maybe rest, digest. Okay, so maybe a little extra sleep, maybe a little extra food, good nutritious food. I threw this slide in here for you to just be a study slide, a nice review of the basics of the parasympathetics and the sympathetics. So know that they are antagonistic to each other. So the sympathetics, let's look at that. The pupils would be dilated. So the parasympathetics, they would be constricted. Okay, so inhibited saliva in sympathetics, stimulated saliva in parasympathetics, because we know parasympathetic is rest and digest. So we're going to increase saliva and all of the digestive secretions in parasympathetics. So this is just a review slide, so you can take a look at this. You can see that the parasympathetics are coming up from here, right? So cranial nerves, specifically 3, 7, 9, and 10. And then we could see sacral as well. So cranial sacral for parasympathetics. And then we can see sympathetics here, generally going to be thoracolumbar, lower cervical thoracolumbar. Okay, so just a little review slide for you here in picture format if that's how you like to study. Amygdala, the A in our hippo and a hat, right? So we have hippocampus, and then we went through hypothalamus. Now we're on to amygdala. And you could see the amygdala right here. Okay, so amygdala. So this is responsible for emotional learning, fear conditioning, classical conditioning. So the classic example here is classical conditioning with Pavlov's dog, if you remember. So that was really working on the amygdala. So this is responsible for that emotional learning. So when you see this, you expect that. Or fear conditioning. The classical conditioning is the dog. It would hear a bell ring and it would start to salivate, even though bell ringing does not innately have anything to do with parasympathetics or food, but he started to associate it with it. So this is the learning aspect, the conditioning aspect of it. Functional MRIs will show more activity in the amygdala the more emotionally stressful a memory is. So while that patient is in this functional MRI and they are recalling a stressful memory, we see this area light up, amygdala. So when I think of amygdala, I think of anxiety and what drives anxiety. A for A, amygdala anxiety, and the ability for us to not be anxious as well. So emotional recognition and memory as well. So people that have had their amygdalas removed, so some severe forms of epilepsy, they'll just remove parts of the brain in order to attempt to give the patient their life back. And what we see happen here is that patient will lose their ability to fear, which sounds like a good idea, but it's really not congruent with safety, all right? Why do we not jump off of the 9th story balcony to get down to our car because we're afraid we'll die, right? Even though it's quicker to get there that way. So fear has an innate safety mechanism built into us. We also see that they don't recognize fear in others, which is extremely dangerous as a society. So when we see someone afraid of something and maybe running from a burning building, that needs to register that there's, a threat, and we need to recognize it. We also need to know when we're making others afraid as well. Anxiety disorders, we'll see greater activity here in the amygdala. And then for bipolar, we'll see reduced volume in the amygdala. So the amygdala is this critical center for coordinating this behavioral, autonomic, and endocrine responses to our environmental stimuli, especially when we have an emotional content. And if you look at the picture here of the brain, there's a little red circle showing the approximate location of where that amygdala is. So it allows the generation of a learned emotional response to different varieties of situations. So not always bad. Okay? So even though we associate this with anxiety, it's not always bad. It can be good processes as well. But remember that this is in order to keep us safe. So when I am working on a patient and I go in to adjust their neck, and their conscious mind is accepting of me and the work that I'm doing, their subconscious mind might not be. And so what I tell them is that you put fear right next to pain, and I'm touching all of your sore spots. And to me, that's describing some of the amygdala's responsibility. So they transfer that fear onto me because I'm touching their sore spots. And then they don't want to let go and relax and release. And so I calmly explain to them that we're just going to build trust, and that neurologically that amygdala is processing those emotions of their pain and whatever the stressor was that created that subluxation or knot in their muscle or whatever the issue is. Whatever, some stressor caused that, and as we say, the body remembers that subconsciously, and we need to tread lightly as we go to unlock that. And so once I explain to them that their body associates pain and fear as very similar emotions, and you're protecting that area on purpose as a survival mechanism, they get it. And then they know that I get it as the practitioner, and they're going to relax a little bit easier, and you build that process. So we're going to create a different emotional memory is the goal, right? So we want to create a nice peaceful emotional memory and slowly unlock that pain generator. Our thalamus, so this is that switching station, or like a telephone switchboard. Okay? So it's going to relay information, okay? So sensory signals into our cerebral cortex. Okay, so it's going to bring information up. So spinal thalamic, touch, pain, temperature. The thalamus has all sorts of nuclei that we looked at in chapter 16. So the VPL is going to be specifically for dorsal columns and touch, pain, and temperature. But we have the VPM for trigeminal. We have the lateral geniculate bodies for visual input. We have the medial geniculate bodies for hearing input. So the thalamus does a lot of jobs here. But in this example here of the limbic system, we're relaying that pain signal coming up from spinal thalamic. So let's review these clinical correlations again here. The idea is that the spinal thalamic tract carrying touch, pain, and temperature coming up through these pathways, going through the thalamus, going up into that cortex, the 312 somatosensory cortex, and the idea that the patient is in pain and needs help with dealing with this pain. So just moving a bone isn't going to address the entire issue here. So we need to understand the driving force behind why that bone might not be in its proper functioning position there, right? So looking here, this would create some sort of painful event, probably created this situation, and then the pain continues and has locked down this joint. So the goal is to create pain-free range of motion. The goal is not to get that quick HVLA thrust in there with a big loud cavitation. It's not. It's really satisfying when we get that, but it's not the goal. The goal is to get pain-free range of motion restored back into our patient, and however that looks. So a lot of times we have to just do it from a neurological standpoint of relaxing the patient, of creating a safe space for the patient because their body does not feel safe. So even though consciously they might, something is telling their body to lock down that it wasn't safe, and that's why their muscles are tight. That's why you might see some bony misalignments and some improper range of motion and painful ranges of motion. So understanding the neurology of it is key, and then walking back from that fight or flight response, from that lockdown signal, afraid of the body tearing, from that response as well. Okay, so understanding that in a clinical setting, so create a safe space first and foremost and allow their nervous system to relax. And so the other thing that I'm pointing out here is we want to understand that it is really an inflammatory response. Okay, so all of the inflammatory chemicals that we looked at in Chapter 9 specifically, so we saw these different cells that were creating cytokine and chemistry really that was inflammatory and exciting group 4s. And that was going up and into the cord, so it's going to, our nociceptors are going to be the receptors, and it's going to come up into the cord and synapse at that rec side 2, substantia gelatinosa. Then it's going to cross over, and we're going to call it this spinal thalamic tract. And again, we're going to see it synapse up at the thalamus, the VPL of the thalamus, and then up and into whatever area of homunculus it's correlating to in somatosensory 3, 1, 2. And so this whole process is happening, and the system is getting a signal that there's pain, that there's a problem, and the body is trying to lock down movement in order to preserve the body. So if you overstretch, it doesn't want to tear, is basically what it's doing. And so that's going to create pain, and that can create subtle anxiety as well. So getting all these signals in that there's subtly something wrong in the body can be an anxiety generator as well. So we want to understand the emotional component in this chapter, so the limbic system, and how these different things are relating to the limbic system and the understanding of pain or happiness through these limbic system structures. So again, create that safe space for your patient, understand the neurological drive behind why these areas feel tight or out of place, and then respecting that, create a pain-free range of motion. Another little picture here. So I like to learn in pictures so you can see the source of the pain here, DRG here, substantia gelatinosa, crossing over, spinal thalamic tracts. So, moral of the story, fear and pain go together. We want to use that same pathway to deprogram that fear and anxiety and build more of a feeling of comfort and trust into our patients' bodies and into our own through this pathway. And I leave them more with a concept of happiness and safety, and reassure them that that fear, that apprehension, that anxiety is normal, and that helps to keep them safe. So again, we're focusing on their pain, palpating and manipulating their sore spots. So the idea here is we want them to know that it's totally normal, and we want to know too, we want to take care of our own selves and know that it's totally normal for them to associate that irrational fear safety mechanism with us and have some sort of fear or emotional release while we're working on them. So understand that they might start to cry, or they might be afraid, or they might yell at you, or have some irrational explosion of emotions. And that's normal, and it is an opportunity for you to explain to them the limbic system, and that's actually, it's a sign that you've done your job if they have an emotional release like crying on your table, or that experience in the office, because they feel safe. And that's our job, okay, is to create that safe space to allow them to heal. So understanding that is good for you as the practitioner, so you don't take offense, and then being able to explain that emotional release to the patient so they know that that's part of the healing process. Okay, thank you. That was chapter 23, so the limbic system. We have chapter 24. It's very short, very sweet, and to the point, and I'll see you for that.